Hey everyone, welcome to IELTS 2, where we are more advanced than IELTS 1, but still a little bit less advanced than IELTS 3. In this course, we're going to continue preparing, of course, for the IELTS speaking portion of the IELTS exam. So there are 3 tasks. Hopefully you know. If you don't worry, we're going to cover a little bit of the format of the class today. But before we begin with anything today, I want to remind you about something when learning English. If you have already seen the first video for the writing course, hopefully you remember the idea that I shared with you about improving writing. So to improve writing, you should look a lot at reading. You should read the writing of others in order to get an idea of what natural writing looks like, what kind of sentence structures, how people express their feelings, their ideas in words. So in order to write well, you have to read well. Well, this is a speaking course, right? So what do you think about speaking? If writing and reading go together, what 2 skills would go together in this area? Well, speaking and listening. So in order to improve your speaking ability, it's also very, very helpful to listen. Just listen to language. Listen for the rhythm of language. Listen for speed, intonation, pronunciation, stress, all of these things. When you listen a lot, you'll have a better idea of what that language sounds like naturally. So when you speak, you should be trying to imitate the native speakers that you are listening to. Okay? So you can get listening practice in a ton of different ways. We live in an amazing time where you have access to the entire world at your fingertips. Use the internet, use YouTube, use movie sites, watch American movies, British movies, Australian movies. Just anything you can find in English will help you, okay? So try to immerse yourself in the language. Simply studying for the IELTS test, you're going to learn strategies, you're going to learn what kind of questions are on it. But just because you know what the IELTS test is like, the format, the kinds of questions, doesn't mean that you are going to do well. You have to genuinely learn language. You have to supplement what you're learning about IELTS with things that are actually about the English language, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Just try to focus on these 4 skills. Try to focus on really learning English and understanding English. Don't worry so much about a certain grade, your band score on the IELTS test. If you focus too much on this, you're going to forget what's really important about what you're doing here, which is learning a language, okay? So, again, try to listen to native speech, okay? So this specifically for the speaking course. Try to listen to native speech as much as you can and imitate the speakers that you're hearing, okay? So whether you want an American accent or a British accent, it doesn't matter, okay? Neither is better than the other. They're just different. So pick whichever accent you prefer and practice listening. Find movies or music with that accent and listen. And after you listen a lot, try to imitate what you're hearing. And one of the best ways that you can practice speaking and improve and critique yourself and find out where your weaknesses are is to record your speech, okay? Record your speech, listen back to it, compare it with whatever you're trying to imitate, and see what areas don't sound natural to you, okay? So this is a good way that you can practice speaking if you are alone and don't have access to native speakers. Like I didn't have access to native speakers when I was in America trying to learn Vietnamese. It was very difficult. So I had to rely on the internet a lot. I had to be very independent. But if you find the right ways, you can be very, very successful. So just keep trying to find different ways that you can make learning English fun, okay? All right, so what are we going to talk about in this first lesson for IELTS 2? Well, just in case you are now starting the IELTS 2 course, studying with me, I want to make sure that you are familiar with the test format. I mentioned this in IELTS 1, but even if you are continuing on from IELTS 1, it's not a bad idea to refresh your memory about the different portions of this test, as well as the timing, and also an important factor is scoring. Okay? Then we're going to look more in depth at task 2. We're going to look at a timetable, see what the examiner says, how long, like what does it look like, what does it feel like to actually sit down and be face-to-face with the examiner. So what is this like? And as we're looking at task 2, we're also going to look at an example related to the topic of culture, okay? And also, throughout the lesson, some tips and advice. So that's about it for this lesson. I hope you're ready. Try to stay strong, stay focused. I know that IELTS is not the most fun thing to be learning when we're talking about English because it's kind of stressful. You're really worried about your score, but I'm going to try to make it as painless and enjoyable as I possibly can. So with that, let's get started and take a look at some IELTS-related speaking ideas. Before we get crazy and just jump right into looking at task 2, let's take a deep breath for a second and just try to look at the big picture of the IELTS speaking test. If you already know this information, fine, good for you. But just in case, I want to make sure that everybody is familiar with what to expect on this portion of the IELTS exam. So, when you sit down to do your speaking test, you're going to be alone. It's going to be very quiet. There's going to be a very professional person sitting there, and you're going to walk in and sit down next to them, and just the two of you are going to be in a room, and the examiner will ask you questions, and you will have to respond. And so that's basically the general idea of the speaking test. The total time, it's pretty short. It's only going to be around 11 to 14 minutes for all 3 parts. So it's not very long. However, speaking is often one of the skills that students are most worried about. So even though it's short, you should be putting a lot of effort and practice into this specific skill. Because it can be difficult, especially if you are nervous, okay? So simply speaking is hard enough to begin with in a foreign language, even when you're in a comfortable setting. So for example, for me in Vietnam, even I'm hanging out with my friends, we're eating, we're drinking Coke, and we're just laughing and stuff. Even in that kind of a relaxing situation, I still have difficulty speaking Vietnamese. I don't want to sound like an idiot. I know my grammar has problems. Maybe my accent is funny. People are laughing at me. But you can't think about these kinds of things. If you really, really want to improve, you have to just accept that you are learning something and you're going to make mistakes. So keep that in mind when you're practicing. But now for the actual test, now you're adding a level of worry and nervousness. Maybe you're shaking in your boots and you're like, oh my God, I hope I do well, okay? So in order to try to mitigate or reduce that feeling of stress, Having a very, very solid background on what to expect will help you. Because think about it. When we're nervous, why are we nervous? Most of the time, the reason is a fear of the unknown. So, in order to fight against that fear of the unknown, what you can do is to make sure that you know what to expect. So that when you sit down and you go to take the IELTS test, you're not surprised. You're like, why are they asking me a question like this? What? Okay, so if you practice a lot, if you familiarize yourself with each of these tasks, as well as the timing, the setting, so for example, the setting would be you're sitting in a room with the examiner alone, talking. If you are not surprised, you can reduce the amount of stress. Okay, maybe not completely. You're still going to be nervous a little bit, but use that nervous energy to wake you up, to make you focused. Okay? So, 11 to 14 minutes, you have 3 tasks. What are these 3 tasks like? Well, part 1, you're just going to be answering some quick questions about yourself, your family, if you're working or studying, and also they may ask you about your interests. So, for example, you come in and the examiner will ask you some very basic questions. What is your name? Can I see your identification, please? And then after that, they might ask you, what do you enjoy doing? Like these days, are you a student? Are you working? Do you like your job? What is your favorite thing to do with your friends? How many people are in your family? Things like that, basic questions, okay? So that's going to be about 4 to 5 minutes of this total time. In part 2, now this is maybe a little bit more stressful because they're going to give you a card, okay? And it's going to have a specific prompt or a topic on it. You're going to have 1 minute to sit in silence and think about what you want to say, how you want to respond to the prompt on the card. And then after that 1 minute, the examiner will tell you, okay, you have 2 minutes. Now please speak. And if you exceed 2 minutes, I will stop you. Okay? So then after all that, after you say blah, 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 the examiner is going to ask you 1 or 2 questions. Sorry, that should be 1. That's a typo. Ask 1 or 2 questions about that same topic. Okay? So I don't want to say too much about this right now because this is going to be our focus for today. Since we're starting IELTS 2, it's a little bit more difficult. I want to focus on part 2 because this is a little bit more difficult than part 1. Sometimes to be able to speak straight for 2 minutes, even 1 minute, can be a little bit difficult in a foreign language. So I want to talk about how to approach this question. Okay? So for this, about 3 to 4 minutes total when you factor in the 1 minute of preparation, 2 minutes of speaking, and then 1 or 2 follow-up questions from your examiner. Okay? Then lastly, part 3, task 3. They're going to ask you more questions about whatever you were talking about in part 2. However, in part 3, they're going to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about some abstract ideas. So here you're going to be given the opportunity to demonstrate that you have the ability to communicate in English at a higher level, not simply basic things like, my family has 5 people, including me. My mom, my dad, blah, blah, blah. Nobody actually communicates like that in English. Let's be honest. If you go to America and somebody is talking to you on the street, you're most likely not going to be in a situation where you have to say something like, my family has 5 people, including me. My mom, my dad, my brother, my sister. Blah, 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 and me. People don't naturally talk like that. People, this is going to replicate more advanced, more natural communication in a language. So don't try to swallow too much information at once. Just have a general idea of what each of these three parts are about, the timing, and today we're going to focus on part 2. But before that, one thing that I know that all of you are so concerned with, and sometimes it breaks my heart because I think that there are a lot of students who only care about this. Even if you don't know or understand English, if you can get 100% of these areas, if you can get a 9 on the IELTS test, you'd be happy. Even if you don't understand or know English, but you can get a 9, you'd be happy. That breaks my heart because I want you to genuinely be learning English to communicate, to use it, okay? But I realize that this is also important because you have goals, you have dreams, and you need to reach a certain level on the IELTS test in order to achieve those dreams. So let me talk a little bit about the scoring of the IELTS test. Similar to writing, they divided your scoring into 4 different categories, each weighted equally, 25%. So the first 25% for fluency and coherence. What does this mean, fluency and coherence? Well, when something is fluent, it just comes out. Think about water, like fluid, okay? So to be fluent means your speech flows like water. You don't have to talk like this when you are speaking, okay? So that is an example of non-fluent speech. Right now, the way that I'm talking now is fluent speech. I can communicate my ideas easily. I can speak about whatever topic you want me to talk about. This is fluent speech, okay? And the idea of coherence. Maybe you can say a lot of sentences at once, but they don't connect. That would be incoherent, when your sentences do not connect. When your ideas connect, when what you are saying follows the same topic, it's organized thought, it's organized speech. That would be the idea of coherence, okay? So, does your speech flow well and follow a consistent idea? 25% for that. Next, vocabulary. Maybe you know all the grammar rules in the world, but you have no vocabulary. Well, you're not going to be a very effective user of the English language if you don't know any words, okay? But in terms of IELTS, if you're taking the IELTS test, they expect you to know vocabulary already. However, in this category here for vocabulary, what they really want to know is, can you demonstrate a wide range of vocabulary? Do you only know simple words, or can you explain more complex or abstract ideas with your speech? Okay. So also, can you explain the same idea in multiple different ways? So for example, if you have something like, really anything, any word has synonyms. So instead of saying, I was so happy, maybe you could say something like, I was ecstatic. I was so excited. I was on top of the world, something like that. That's more of a wide range of vocabulary than simply knowing a word like happy. Okay, so that's the idea here. Also, grammar. Grammar is important. In the real world, if you are communicating with somebody, grammar, you don't necessarily need to have perfect grammar to communicate with people. However, for IELTS, you should pretend that you do. Okay? And in this area, specifically what they want to know is, can you only form one type of sentence structure? For example, I am Brandon. I am 22 years old. I am from the United States. I am a guitar player. Like that. Like I am. That's bad. That's not a wide variety of sentence structure. Okay, so something more advanced that the IELTS examiner would be looking for would be like this. Hi, my name's Brandon. I recently just graduated from a college in the United States. I really enjoyed studying linguistics there because it allowed me to chase my dream of teaching English in Vietnam. It helped prepare me to do what I'm doing now, like blah, blah, blah. Something like that. Not just I am. It's very boring, and it's going to show that you don't know too much about grammar, okay? So try to listen to speech and try to see what kind of ways people are explaining their ideas. Think about sentence structures. Even reading will help you with this as well. Okay, so grammatical range and accuracy. Accuracy, are you using those structures correctly? That's all, okay? All right, and lastly, pronunciation, 25% for pronunciation. Now, this is something that people worry about a lot. And I underlined and italicized, okay, turned it to the right, slanted text, this word, effortless, because this idea is so important for you to understand. And maybe this will help you relieve some of your stress. When your examiner is concerned with pronunciation, they are not looking for you to have a 100% native-like accent. What they want is for you to be understandable effortlessly. So if the examiner can understand you without having to really focus and listen and go, well, what was that word? If they don't have to do this, then that is a good thing, okay? Oh, what did I do? Oops. When you're speaking, as long as you are close enough to the correct pronunciation so that the examiner can hear you and understand you clearly, that is enough. You don't have to have a perfect native accent. That's not necessary, okay? Your goal should be to try to get as close to that native accent as you can, but it's very difficult for a learner of English as a second language to achieve a perfect speaking accent. So just try to get as close as you possibly can to the correct pronunciation. All right, so that's it for your 3 tasks and the scoring. I know it was a little bit long of a review. I'm sorry, but I really think that this especially is important. If you are preparing for something, you should know what you are going to be expected of. Okay, so what are they expecting when they're grading your test? That's what you should focus on when you're practicing for IELTS. All right, so let's move on now and start talking about task 2 more specifically and in depth.